Good evening, faithful listeners. Welcome to the dark halls and lightless shuttered chambers of Vulture's Rainbow Theatre. I am your host, Damon Vulture. Tonight, in our continuation of the Guns of Sotol Flats, we follow the strange fortunes of Barkeep Simon Dulhunty, and we witness justice done for our angry and vengeful Billy Ryder. And now, we start with Chapter 12, at Dulhunty's Saloon. Chapter 12, at Dulhunty's Saloon. If Simon Dulhunty had been worried some weeks ago about the change in clientele at his Golden Horn Saloon, he had every reason to feel absolutely petrified now. Not one unmasked face ever showed up in his establishment for a drink these days, and none of the mysterious customers with their covered faces and their narcotic taffy ever showed up before 10:30 at night. And yet, at this point, Simon's anxiety had actually begun to abate. Not only was this new after-hours business booming, the receipts from sales actually exceeded anything he'd brought in previously. No money lost, he was sleeping later in the mornings, and every one of the faceless gentlemen behaved themselves with the utmost propriety. On this particular night, for example, the drinking and gambling proceeded as it had most recently, with not one incident or one moment of trouble. And for whatever reason, though he was now open well beyond the curfew established in the town's ordinances, no one ever came by to complain or to warn Simon with legal document in hand that he was in violation. Simon had a feeling that no one would, at least not right now. As he strolled among the tables, chatting briefly with a few of the customers who were known to him, recognized by a tie or a piece of jewelry or some other idiosyncrasy of attire in the absence of faces, he felt that the massed crowd regarded him with affection and appreciation. After all, he could have shut down or asked the sheriff to look in on the doings in his establishment, but he had elected to let the thing play out to see where this new crowd would take his business. He was also afraid of what would happen to him if he did not cooperate, but by wisely transmuting that fear into a projected attitude of tolerance, he had helped to move the situation forward. He received many pats on the shoulder, and there were many who greeted him fondly and asked after his health. In fact, he was almost beginning to feel as if he were counted, in an honorary way, as one of them. He returned to the bar from his rounds on the floor just in time to meet a customer who was seating himself at a stool. "Well, how do, Mr. Simon? You seem to be in a good humor this evening." "Indeed, yes, my boy. To see my place filled by so many gentlemen of fine quality with treasure to spend, it's all quite inspiring," he said. "I reckon so, Mr. Simon," the customer answered. "Don't suppose you keep a bottle of Three Skulls bourbon up there, do you?" "Three Skulls, the very finest. One moment, lad," the barkeep said, reaching below the counter to bring up a dusty bottle. "I've not opened this in quite some time. 'Twas a favourite of the Royalist rebels some years ago, but none of them have been around here since the beginning of the peace." "Can you keep a secret, Mr. Dulhunty?" the customer asked. "Well, of course, my lad. What sort of barkeep would I be if I could not? Once upon a time, I was an officer on General Jefferson Tryon's staff. Those were heady times fighting for our rights against the dictator Hamblin, he mused, referring to the late president, whose assassination had been the last act of violence in a bloody civil war. I'm a late arrival to the Republic, replied Simon. Came from the old country after the war to work on the railroads. I heard much of those times. Sorry you lads lost. What's the world coming to? He added, wanting to sound sympathetic, even though secretly he considered Negro slavery to be a bad business and was glad it was in the past, where in his opinion it should stay. Have you ever considered becoming one of us? The customer asked. I went over to the darkness for revenge. We may have lost one war, he said, but we'll win this one. With that, he left something on the bar along with the cash for his drink. Off he walked to a table, leaving Simon alone with his gift. There, among the coins, lay one of those cigar-like pieces of black taffy, a length of the narcotic which the newspapers had taken to calling nightweed. The royalist gentleman had given him an invitation to join them, to become one with his clientele. Of course, he had no interest in revenge, but the feeling had been growing in him that he belonged with them. They were his customers, and through their friendliness and openness with him for the last few weeks, they had begun to seem almost like family. Though they should have been blinded by their masks, they were obviously unimpaired in their movements and unobstructed in seeing the world by whatever form of vision had now become theirs. He supposed it would be the same for him once the light became hateful. He could feel the tug, the pull from the piece of nightweed, and in his mind for a moment he had a brief vision of himself flying in the dark, flying around and around something which pulled in the dark, which called out with sweet blandishments, and he could feel that the souls of all those around him in his bar flew with him. He ignored the thing for a while, pulling the coins off the counter and sticking them into the cash box he kept locked just under the shelves of spirits behind him. He wiped a bit of counter and tightened the lid on the pickles. And then he reached for it, for the length of nightweed, for the thing that served the same purpose as an envelope with a bit of stationery inside it. The Association of Masked Men is honored to extend to Simon Dulhunty an invitation to join our most sacred brotherhood, with access thereby to all the rights and privileges offered therein. Those were the words which would have been written in the folded bit of linen stationery had the invitation been a written one. But this taffy cigar was just as good as. Dulhunty ran the length of the thing under his nose, smelling the dark scent it gave off, of something like a mixture of dark chocolate, the moist, cool air of night, and fresh blood. Was it his imagination, or had the room suddenly become quiet? He looked up to see that every masked face was turned in his direction, that every gentleman had suspended his hand of cards, his next sip of mezcal, to see what Simon would do. Simon could have interpreted the complete attention of the room as pressure on him to take the plunge into the darkness, but he chose to see it instead as the reverent regard of family, beaming with pleasure as he undertook this self-initiation into the brotherhood of Yut. He bit into the length of dark, sweet nightweed. Sight fled from him and strength left him. He collapsed to the floor and knew nothing for a while, but that he was a creature flying in an endless circle over a canyon made invisible by forever night. Somewhere below, Mother Spider called to him, not with words, but with the pull of her inexorable will. And with him flew his brothers, all of them both the children and the ultimate prey of Yut, the mother of darkness, the maw of eternity. Slowly he came to, now with full awareness of the bar. With both hands he gripped the lip of the counter and hauled himself up to a standing position. The light of the room was blinding, piercing into his brain as though knives were being driven into his eyes. As he squinted them shut, he felt someone shove into his hand a thing of cloth, and he knew what it was. It was an eyeless mask, ready for him to pull over his head. He did so, realizing that he no longer needed eyes to see. In the darkness of the mask, he was aware of every object and every person, where they were, what they were doing, how they were dressed, and even, this was most amazing, how their faces looked. He gestured with his hands as if he'd been a magician who'd just completed a trick, and the crowd went wild. The applause lasted for over a minute. Dulhunty bowed. He was at home with family. When the applause died, he shouted out, "Douse the lights!" There was a cheer, and everything in the bar went dark. But not for Dulhunty and his friends. Chapter 13. El Calvo's Visitation. As soon as he received the report about doings at the Winters farm from the two mysterious gentlemen who'd come into his camp, he moved immediately to locate the perpetrators. He knew who'd been sent to requisition food and necessities forcibly from the sheep ranch. With Eduardo Gonzalez and Billy Ryder watching, the men from the raid had been brought before him, not yet knowing the reasons why, though one could see the uneasiness growing in each eye. "Capitan Ortega," El Calvo called out, gesturing with a single crooked finger, as he sat in the canvas chair that had been unfolded for him. A travel-stained vaquero stepped out from the line of fearful men to stand before the senator turned commander. "It has been brought to my attention that your recent raid to the north of Villarreal del Rio was quite successful. Is that right?" "Sí, comandante," he replied. "We brought back some weapons, some ammunition, some grain, some new men to fight for us, horses, and a lot of chivo," he said. "And you brought back something else, Capitan Ortega. Can you recall what it was?" "No, Comandante, there was nothing else," the man replied, looking increasingly uneasy. "There is one more thing you brought back with you, Señor Capitan. You brought back vergüenza. With all of your loot, you brought back shame. Shame on this army of the Republic, shame on our country of Tolixco, and shame on your Comandante. Did I not make the rules clear? Did I not establish the procedures by which we should requisition our supplies from the people of Navaja?
Did I not stress how important it was that this work be carried out with honor, insofar as honor was possible? And you do this? The men you shot, fine, they were armed and would have killed you. This was permitted. But the rape and murder of a woman, this cannot go without justice.
He turned to gaze at the other men.
Some of you who will not be named by your comrades did this thing, while your Capitan watched and permitted it. The rest? You had every chance to report these misdeeds to me, but you did not. I hold each and every one of you personally to blame, as if you had attacked the woman yourselves. For this crime, you are, all of you, sentenced to death by execution. Such sentence to be carried out immediately. Seize them, he called out, and the assembled soldiers moved forward to grab their accused comrades. As men returned with rope, the guilty parties were tied up and seated on the ground in a line. A squad of riflemen assembled to face the accused as the spectators moved back behind their executioners. El Calvo turned to Billy. If you wish, Senor Ryder, you may join the riflemen and discharge your weapon with them. Thank you, Senator, but I'll pass. If I draw this gun, I might just turn it on the rest of you. Understood, said the senator. Lieutenant, he called out to the officer in charge of the rifles. You may fire when ready. The lieutenant called his men to attention, then to order arms, and finally to aim their weapons. There was a brief period of silence. The seated unfortunates looked at the ground or shut their eyes to pray. Fire! Instructed the lieutenant. Later, El Calvo invited Ryder and Gonzales to his tent, for they had brought more intelligence with them than just the report of misdeeds on the winter's land. At their request, he'd sent the guards away. As he seated himself on a bunk, leaving them the folding chairs, he regarded them with curiosity and respect. They were clearly fighters with skill. Though there was something fearful and strange about these two, they also seemed honest and straightforward. In fact, he mused that they might be convinced to become recruits, but laid the thought aside for later. Now they appeared to have something most urgent on their minds. Ryder let Gonzales do the talking. As strange as their story was, they both agreed that it might be more believable coming from the mouth of a fellow Torixqueño. El Calvo was incredulous. As he listened, his rapt attention in the beginning began to wander, and there came the point where he simply stood up from the bunk and rubbed his hands together. Gentlemen, he said, smiling uneasily, it appears you intend to deceive and manipulate me with superstition. I am an educated man who has been trained in the ways of reason. Surely you cannot expect me to accept such a story as this, about a great darkness and witches and the fearful deities you describe. We anticipated your skepticism, Eduardo said. He and Billy looked at each other and then turned to face El Calvo. They reached toward their eyes with their hands, shoving fingers into the lids, and with a wet, sucking sound, plucked from their faces the glass orbs they had been given. El Calvo became violently sick, then passed out on his bunk. You have been listening to Vulture's Rainbow Theatre. If you enjoy this continuing novella by author Michael Terlouw, you might consider reading a Halloween classic available as an ebook at Amazon, Beggar's Night by Michael T. and Matt Hurtado. Yuba Heights, Ohio, 1964.
A middle-aged couple appears in this suburban neighborhood dressed in 19th century clothes and running shoes from the future. They are seen in pursuit of a teenage boy who wears a cotton bag for a mask and carries a coil of sticky black cable. What are these strange people up to? 3 young boys investigate, and the trail leads them to the land of forever night, where, in a grim world of no stars, no moon, and no sun, they discover the terrifying and sinister presence that waits in the heart of that world's everlasting darkness. This is Damon Vulture wishing you good night and dark dreams.